We're back on 620 AM WSNR and on 93.5 FM HD2, and we're streaming on the legendary Zev Brenner's TalkLineNetwork.com. I'm Jeff Lax, and as always, you can tweet us during the show at Jeff Lax Live, at Jeff Lax Live. It is my great honor to introduce former U.S. Ambassador to Israel, David Friedman. Ambassador Friedman has a documentary coming out soon about his work on the Abraham Accords, and he has a new book coming out in February called Sledgehammer: How Breaking with the Past Made Peace in the Middle East. The book is available for pre-order on Amazon now, and if you pre-order, you also lock in the guaranteed lowest price with Amazon, so go out and get it and feel safe that no one's going to get a better deal in the coming months. Mr. Ambassador, you and I have spent two very memorable evenings together. One was the night before the 2016 election at your final campaign speaking engagement, and the other was at the 2016 election night party the next day. And that is one night that I personally will never forget, and that certainly changed yours forever, I'm sure. Thank you so much for joining us.
I certainly remember those nights as well, and I'm sure I'll never forget them.
So, Mr. Ambassador, just yesterday, Hamas once again fired a rocket into Israel. There's chaos in Afghanistan. Just days ago, Fox News reported that the president was pressuring Israel to allow the U.S. to open a consulate to the Palestinians in Jerusalem. What is your view of how President Biden is handling Mideast policy, and how would it be different under President Trump?
It's the failure to recognize the unique characteristics of the Middle East. The Middle East is a dangerous place, and the people that you're dealing with there, leaving Israel aside, which is behaves like a Western democracy, but leaving everybody else, aside, when you consider all those countries you have to deal with, I mean, you need to begin and end from a position of strength. It's not that complicated. I've said many times, in the Middle East, you're either strong or you're dead. Those are sort of those are the binary options in the Middle East. And so, when we were in office, we recognized that we have to begin with strength. And by the way, strength is not just strength of military power, although, of course, that's a very important part of it. But it means strength of values, of mission, strength of commitment, strength of keeping your word. It all comes down to, are you strong physically, and can you be trusted to keep your word? And that's what Trump did differently. He did it differently from Obama. You remember, of course, the famous case where Obama set out a red line when Assad, the butcher, used chemical weapons on his own people, and he didn't enforce that red line. One of the first things Trump did was to attack Syria when they used chemical weapons to show that, we would do what we said. And now you see in the Biden administration really a return to that, to that mistake. And it's heartbreaking because, we did a lot of good in 4 years in the Middle East. We left the Middle East a much better, safer, more prosperous place than we found it. And almost all these gains are now either reverting or they're in the process of being reversed. And, it's hard to watch.
Yeah, it's very scary how quickly things can deteriorate like this. It's just unbelievable. I'm watching video in the corner of my room of what's going on in Afghanistan, and you're so right how quickly a bad policy can change things so quickly. To me, Ambassador Friedman, you really redefined the role of an ambassador. You had an agenda. You've talked about it. You were a master persuader, it sounds like, from all the stories I've read, in implementing that agenda, both within the administration. I know you had pushback from certain people, and also in the world. Having come from being a civilian and a bankruptcy partner at Castle Woods Benson, where did you get this model from, and how did you learn how to become an ambassador?
The short answer is, I got my values from my parents. My father was a distinguished pulpit rabbi for over 50 years, who believed deeply, deeply in the importance of the U.S.-Israel relationship. He lived it, whether in 1948, rejoiced with my mother. They got married just like a month after Israel declared its independence and Harry Truman recognized the state of Israel. I remember them rejoicing in the Six-Day War after Jerusalem was reunified. So, it's sort of deeply ingrained in me, this great love of Israel and the importance to the United States of supporting Israel. So I got that from my parents. In terms of the power of persuasion, look, when you if you try, 100 cases over the course of a career and you manage to win, a decent number of them, you get good at it. It's good training for
Right.
that. And I took office, I think, with a little bit of a different perspective than many people in office. I really was a purist. I didn't view this as a launching pad to another position. I didn't look at it as a way to start a political career or to kind of gain any level of any advantage in the future. I just really believed deeply in the values that I held, and I was prepared to, either advance those values, or if it turned out that those values were not supported by the administration, I was prepared to quit. But I was not prepared to do anything but advance the values that I believe strongly in. And I was very fortunate to have a close relationship with the president, not just a personal relationship, but one of trust that comes from having an attorney-client relationship over the years. And I think that relationship enabled me to have the president's confidence, which is absolutely essential to any of the advancements we were able to make.
I mean, I am not surprised that you would say that, but it is so refreshing to hear something like that. And I love hearing when you say that you had an agenda, and if you weren't going to be able to work on that agenda, you would have just not taken the role. I love that, because it's so funny. When I think of an ambassador traditionally, I always imagine this plum diplomatic position of going to balls at palaces, smoking cigars, sipping martinis, and parking wherever you want. And I think it's so funny because I think the role of ambassador to Israel is very different. What qualities do you think an ambassador to Israel needs to have that might be different from other ambassadors?
Well, I think look, the president told me before I took the job. He made it very clear to me that my job was not the plum ambassadorial job of hosting parties. I do appreciate the ability to park, especially in a country like Israel where parking is so difficult. But short of parking privileges, I was not there to to have parties or to kind of burnish my own ego. The goal was to try to advance the relationship. Now, we were coming off of 8 years of the Obama administration. 8 years when we suffered some. The relationship really took a bunch of hits. That first trip to Cairo, where Obama all but apologized for supporting Israel. It concluded with the UN Security Council passing Resolution 334, which goes so far as to consider the Western Wall as illegally occupied territory. So we had a lot of work to do to repair that relationship. And so the goal, the first job, was to regain Israel's trust. Our view is that Israel is an incredibly important ally. Israel keeps Americans safe. I don't think enough Americans realize that, but there are a lot of threats that could be exported to America from the Middle East, and Israel has very good eyes on it. Israel has great perspective and intelligence capacity, and they protect Americans with the same vigor and the same commitment as they protect their own citizens. So having that relationship, I think people underestimate how important that was, and we were determined to make sure it was as robust as possible. And then, after we regained that trust, which we were able to do fairly quickly, the next step is, well, can we make this region safer, more secure? Can we help Israel advance some of their interests towards peace? Can we make progress with the Palestinians? Can we make progress in the region? And can we tie up, a bunch of loose ends that had been, frankly, maintained way too loose for more than 50 years. So we addressed Jerusalem, we addressed the Golan Heights, we addressed the legality of settlements. We worked with the Israelis and others to put out a vision of peace that Israel, the first vision of peace that the Israelis felt met their security needs, and then of course we leveraged that to normalize, to broker normalization agreements, peace agreements between Israel and 5 Muslim nations. So there was a sequence to it. And it all began with, re-establishing a level of trust with Israel.
And I thought, one of the questions I had with your administration coming in, and you referenced Obama's going away president to Israel, refusing to veto the UN resolution. And one of the things that upset me so much about that is that we all knew how hard it was to get out of that. That was a permanent gift that future administrations would have so much trouble getting out of it. And I always wondered, I knew you would do good things with Israel, but I never knew, would he do things that were everlasting, that would stand the test of time? And you definitely have with the Abraham Accords and all the things you just mentioned. And that's such a gift to the Jewish people, to Israel, and to America. Like you said, they're on the front lines, Israel is. And listen, I, for one, I know I express the views of so many people when I say how much I appreciate not only the good things you did, but the permanence of it, to the extent that those things are going to last beyond the damage that's happening now. I'd like to get a little bit personal, and certainly don't answer anything you don't want to answer. But I got to tell you, when I watched your confirmation hearings, I bet you that I suffered just as much as your family, because watching the way you were treated, to me, you transformed from civilian to ambassador that day, because your answers were skillful, they were brilliant, they were diplomatic, and I thought the way you handled offensive questions and offensive insinuations was just fabulous. You know, one thing I've always wondered, who, if anyone, helped prep you for those confirmation hearings? And how did you come to what I thought was such a brilliant decision to invite Senator Lieberman to speak on your behalf?
Well, you know, first of all, just to put this in context, I had the most contested, longest confirmation hearing for a bilateral ambassador position in the history of the United States, just to put this in perspective. Almost all of these, if you ever watch these hearings, they usually take 6 or 7 ambassadors, they stick them at a table, each one gets 1 or 2 questions, the whole thing lasts about 45 minutes to an hour. That's the traditional thing. Yeah. Because I was nominated early, very early, the earliest in the history of the U.S.-Israel relationship, I was nominated before the president even took office. There was no other ambassadors, in the docket, and as you know, there was a massive level of opposition to my nomination. Now, what they did with me, it's oddly enough, I mean, I was being considered for confirmation around the same time as Justice Gorsuch was. So, I'm kind of being shepherded around these people. They're the people that help you. They're called Sherpas. So I had my own Sherpa. He had a Sherpa, and we were being, escorted around for meetings with senators. And I actually would go in there and meet people as he was coming out, or I would be coming out as he was going in. I thought to myself, this is insane that my nomination is getting the same attention as a future Supreme Court judge. But I went through all these meetings. We have a thing called murder boards, where they actually stick you in a room and a bunch of State Department people play various senators, and they run questions at you and they hit you with all those things. And so I went through all of that. But at the end of the day, the process is flawed. It's an opportunity for many senators to grandstand, to make points. There were plenty of times when a senator would make a statement, masquerading as a question, and then leave the room before I even had a chance to answer. The question would take their entire allotted time, and then I'd have no allotted time to even respond. So that it wasn't a fair process. But none of that bothered me. What bothered me about the whole process was, look, I hold a view about the U.S.-Israel relationship that is admittedly to the right, but it's not crazy. I mean, it's just a right-wing, pro-Israel view. I mean, there are tens of millions of people in America who agree with that view, and the president who was elected, had a similar view. So presidents get the privilege of choosing people to work for them that have their view. Now, when Obama was in office and he selected my predecessor, Dan Shapiro, whose views reflect those of Obama's, nobody, gave it a second look. I think he went through the process with a voice vote of like 90-0. I mean, people basically deferred to a left-wing president to appoint a left-wing ambassador. What bothered me was why in the world the United States Senate wouldn't give the same level of deference to a right-wing president to appoint a right-wing ambassador. And the answer is because the Jewish community, regrettably, just institutionally doesn't tolerate left-wing views, in terms of, a good half of the organized Jewish organizations out there. They just don't tolerate it. Whereas, the right-wing Jewish organizations, don't sink to that level. I mean, nobody on the right got up and opposed Dan Shapiro. And by the way, they shouldn't have, because Dan
Right.
Shapiro was the appropriate ambassador for Barack Obama. And he happens to be a good guy. He happens to like Israel. I happen to disagree with him on almost everything, but I think he's a good guy and worthy of the job. And so the idea that, I couldn't get the same level of courtesy was offensive to me. Now, the process itself, I mean, I'm a big boy, and as I said, I've tried lots of cases. I can go through a process and answer questions, but the fact that this kind of show trial occurred was upsetting to me, only in the sense that there is a double standard in this country against people who have, right-wing views on Israel. I mean, there are, you all know who they are. I mean, they're half the Jewish organizations in the United States cannot abide by, somebody with right-wing views, whereas the right-wing organizations are much more accepting of differences of opinion.
Yeah, and to your point, to me, the most disappointing moment of the whole charade of that part of it was when you have Jewish groups marching in, singing Tikkun Olam songs, and they're wearing yarmulkes, and just to do that, what a, honestly, it's just such a chil Hashem to do that to you. Like you said, it's okay. Some people are more right, some people are more left, but the way they did that to you, not only was it inappropriate, I thought it was such an embarrassment to those groups. But anyway, I don't want to go on and on about that.
It made for good theater for a day. At the end of the day, none of these groups really had any impact at all on my ability to do my job.
Did it disappoint you? And listen, you're going to be diplomatic about this, I'm sure, now that you're a diplomat. But did it disappoint you? Because I took names, okay? Did it disappoint you that you did not get Charles Schumer's vote? I thought that was very interesting and sad. And Rand Paul's vote. You also didn't get Rand Paul's vote. And then on the flip side, you got Menendez's vote and you got Manchin's vote, and that was probably the Lieberman strategy, I think.
No, I did get Rand Paul's vote. I did.
Oh, you did? I didn't see that. Okay.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I got Rand Paul's vote. He was actually he and I had a wonderful discussion privately, and I did get his vote. I got no Republican no's. There might have been a couple of Republicans that didn't make it or didn't show up. I know one of them was sick, but no, I only got two Democratic votes, Senators Manchin and Menendez. Why did Schumer vote against me? He'll have to live with his conscience on that one. But this is a guy. What was the accusation against me? That I was too far to the right and I was too much in favor of settlements in Judea and Samaria that could somehow impact upon the viability of a two-state solution. That was the non-personal attack against me. And here's Schumer, a guy who I've heard him, at AIPAC. I've shared the stage with him at AIPAC in front of 18,000 people, and he gets up and he says that the settlements have nothing to do with why there's no peace between Israel and the Palestinians. And he got a great, round of applause from the 18,000 people in the room. But when he then had to consider my appointment and the fact that it would, if he voted for me, it would be viewed as a win for Trump, the politics outweighed everything else. And I think that is a serious character flaw that he has betrayed on many occasions, which he almost always allows politics to outweigh principle. And it's something that I'm, as somebody who, used to be a New Yorker and supported him. I used to, donate to his campaign. I believed in him. I'm very much disappointed.
Me too. Such a disgrace. And he's been very quiet lately too, even after the war, the Gaza attacks. It's just so disappointing. I want to be sensitive to your time. Just a couple of more quick questions, and then I want to let you also talk about your book and your documentary. One of the things I really wanted to ask you, and I'm a big fan of Fauda. So when you mentioned was Zev Brenner's interview about having back channels, to deal with to find out what the Palestinians were thinking, oh my God, I love that. I'm like, oh, that's Fauda. So tell me about the back, to the extent you're able to, obviously. How did you even you're a lawyer. How do you get connected to back channels to begin with? How did it work? And what did you learn about the Palestinians' views of their relationship with Israel that you may not have expected?
Look, I think I'm not going to betray confidences and mention names, but I think that what I learned a few things. First of all, the Palestinian leadership itself is is never going to make peace, because to them the perpetuation of the struggle, if you will, or the fight against the occupation is a cottage industry for them. They make money on it. They fundraise off of it. They get political props from it, and they stay in power on that basis. And so you're not, people don't realize that it's in their interests. And we see that in the United States as well, how it's in the interests of various political groups to make things worse, not to make things better. So I think that the Palestinian leadership is, publicly always going to be very, very difficult. Not a lot of profiles and courage, not a lot of brave people there. Privately, there is some pragmatism. Privately, you can, they share a common enemy with Israel, which is radical Islamic terrorism. I mean, the radical Islamists hate the PA more than they hate Israel, and that includes Hamas hates the PA more than it hates Israel. So there are common interests to keep the PA in power. Now, look, I think the PA I think they're horrible. I think they're corrupt. I think they've done absolutely nothing to show the world that they're capable of living as a open, free society that wouldn't be threatening to its neighbors. But they have one thing going for them, which is that they're not quite as bad as Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad. So there are commonalities of interest, and there are pragmatic discussions that occur from time to time. It's behind the scenes. They will deny it. The Palestinians will deny that they even take place, but that's neither here nor there. But we did manage to have those discussions, and over time they became more difficult for me personally, as I became more associated with positions that the Palestinians were against. It became harder for me to play a direct role, but I always was playing an indirect role up until the very end.
Very interesting, because obviously they didn't know your name, yours or Jason Greenblatt, so you kind of had a blank slate to some degree, at least in the beginning.
Yeah, but believe me, in short order, my picture was being burned, and not in Gaza. My picture was being burned in Ramallah.
Wow. All right. So listen, let me just ask you quickly, and then I want you to talk about your documentary and your book, which sounds so interesting. Listen, you're still pretty young. I mean, we've got a 79-year-old president. You referenced that you never wanted to go into politics, but you had this thing you wanted to accomplish, which I can't commend you enough on your courage with all of that. Is this the beginning of your political career, or is it the end of your political career? What would you want to do if the next election, President Trump runs again and wins in 2024? Are you going to be Secretary of State, National Security Advisor? What's next?
So I divide politics into two groups. Number one, running for elected office. There is zero chance that I'm running for any elected office. So that we can put aside. If there was if the Republicans take the White House, whether it's President Trump or any of my, many friends who are in a position of leadership there, would I serve in a role? Of course. I mean, the idea of serving the United States in its foreign policy is, one of the greatest honors in the world. I think anybody who didn't take that seriously would be crazy, because it's just such an incredible opportunity and an honor just to do that. But I think we're still a ways away from that.
Yeah. I like the answer, though. All right. Tell the listeners about your documentary and your book and how they can get both.
Well, the documentary, we'll start with that. After I left office, I think, a lot of people, adopted the Abraham Accords as an important initiative. They say that, success has many parents and failure is an orphan. And so all of a sudden, what I was watching was people were kind of molding the Abraham Accords into their own, particular arguments or agendas. And I said, look, I mean, I have no problem with that. We're very proud of it. And of course, the Abraham Accords belongs to the world, doesn't belong to me. But I did want to tell the story of the Abraham Accords through the eyes of and through the voices of those who really were active in it. And so, because these are all people that I was close to and were friends with, I was able to, I think, get, unique, unprecedented access to all the players. Now I needed a partner, so I considered a few different partners. Ultimately, I partnered with the Trinity Broadcast Network, which is on virtually every basic cable box in the United States, and has about an 85% market share for evangelical Christians, and I think it reaches beyond that as well. They happen to be excellent filmmakers, and so we partnered with them, and we got to work. And so making a documentary involves direct conversations with people, and then you fill it in with all kinds of man or woman on the street parts or historical references. But we got to work, and we went down to the southern tip of the United States, and we started heading north. We started with Jared Kushner and Avi Berkowitz down in Miami. Then we head up to Palm Beach, and I had a long interview with President Trump, and then we headed up to Washington, and I had the chance to interview Secretary Pompeo and and Vice President Pence and Ambassador Yusuf Al-Otaiba, and then we made a hard right turn and headed off to Israel, where I was able to interview there in Jerusalem Secretary Mnuchin and Ambassador Haley, and of course the former Prime Minister Netanyahu, General Gantz, General Ashkenazi, Ron Dermer, many others. And then we continued east to Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Bahrain, and I was able to interview the leading foreign policy authorities there. And then we went off to Morocco and did the same thing there. And then now we're doing some cleanup and figuring out how to put this thing all together. It'll be probably a 5-hour documentary that it will air like 1 hour per month for 5 months on TBN, probably beginning in November. And it's unique in that it's going to be the only documentary on the Abraham Accords. That will be the only one, but it'll be the only documentary on the Abraham Accords that really puts you in the room with the people that actually negotiated them. So that's, I think, going to be a worthy contribution to the history of an important development.
Right, and the book.
So the book, when I got out of office on January 21st, I looked around. I had nothing to do for the first time in 40 years, and I said I got to do something. So I decided I'm going to write a book. I made a deal with HarperCollins, which is I think the second biggest publisher in the world, and we were off and running. And I basically kind of locked myself in my office in Jerusalem it was 7 weeks, 6 days a week, 8 hours a day, and I banged out the book.
Wow.
It's a personal story about my background and how I became ambassador and what I did as ambassador and what motivated me throughout my years as ambassador. And what it tries to do is to kind of gives you an inside story, a behind the scenes sense of the challenges that I faced in achieving what we were able to achieve, the views of those who supported me, those who tried to get in the way, and also what it does is it tries to, I think, give the reader a sense of of at least my view of kind of the divine forces that I felt were at play throughout this period. I always felt during the 4 years that being the ambassador with the opportunities that I had were just too improbable to be occurring, coincidentally or fortuitously or on the basis of anything I might have done on my own. The way I kind of describe it is, you take a single die and you roll it. You have a 1 out of 6 chance of getting any particular number. So let's say you roll a 3. You have a 1 out of 6 chance of rolling a 3. The question is, what are the chances that you could roll the same 3 9 more times in a row? And I'm kind of a math guy, from my background. And the answer is it's about 1 in 60 million, which means it's about impossible to roll the same number 10 times in a row. But the way I looked at what I was able to do from the time that I met the future president, the relationship I had with him, the probability that he would become president, he would nominate me, I would get confirmed, we'd have all these opportunities. You sort of take it through, and it's so improbable that it's virtually impossible. And when something happens that's virtually impossible, you can scratch your head a little bit. In my case, I really saw it as being God's will, and so I try to, that theme, I think, is also sort of a current that runs through the book as well.
That's so awesome. One of the things my father always tells me when he hears atheists and people who hate religion, he says, "How can you?" My father's a little bit older than you. He says, "How could anybody watch the Yom Kippur War and the 6 Day War? How could they not believe in God?" And that's so similar to what you just said. I've always loved that. I always think about that, and now I'm going to always think about what you just said. I have to tell you, I genuinely, even though I love you and you know that, I really enjoy this conversation. I thank you so much for giving us the time and coming on. And I hope when those book and documentaries come out, you'll come on again.
I think you can count on it. It'd be my pleasure.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Have a good Shabbos and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks, Jeff.